The Belarusian economy is under pressure from two fronts at once. The financial sector is shrinking due to EU sanctions. The energy sector is becoming increasingly fragile due to risks associated with the Druzhba pipeline. Households are caught between inflation-eroded wages and declining living standards. Milk, bread, meat, everything is available, but not for everyone anymore. Mothers think twice before buying their children a carton of juice. Young people memorize border maps to flee to Poland. And most strikingly, the people no longer want Putin or Lukashenko. For them, hope lies in Kiev's resistance and Warsaw's free streets. For millions of people who refuse to live this life of poverty under a repressive regime, this is not just an economic crisis. This is the silent cry of a society that has been silenced. How much longer can this silent anger be suppressed? The EU's 18th sanctions package has changed the rules of the game. Previously, messaging restrictions were imposed on banks. Now, a full transaction ban is in effect for 4 critical banks. This change is akin to pulling the plug on the banks, because correspondent networks and euro transactions are suddenly shutting down. The scope of the ban is clearly outlined in legal texts. Belagroprom Bank is at the top of the list. Belinvest Bank is second on the list. Bank Dabrabit is also included in this group. The Development Bank is also subject to the transaction ban. Belarus Bank is not on the list this time. However, the systemic impact is still widely felt. This is because the 4 banks hold portfolios with a significant public sector exposure. Agriculture, infrastructure, and state projects were being carried out through these banks. Now, payment channels are shifting to more expensive alternatives. Ruble yuan and SPFS CIPS bridges are being activated. However, these bridges increase transaction costs. Timelines are lengthening, discounts are rising, and risk premiums are swelling. Cash conversion periods are extending for exporters and importers. The credit cycle is slowing down due to these delays. The Belarusian central bank is closely monitoring liquidity. Reserve requirements and short-term funding are being kept tight. However, market psychology moves faster than policy intentions. Household demand for foreign exchange could start to pick up again. This is why the term fragile stability is used in banking. The capital adequacy ratio may appear high on paper. However, asset quality must be tested against shocks. Loans directed toward the state carry high risk. This is because repayment depends on state cash flows. State cash flows, in turn, depend on budget revenues. Budget revenues are dependent on the refinery and potash sectors. Potash exports have been under sanctions pressure for years. When the Lithuanian port route closed, costs increased. Alternative routes were established via Russia, but they were expensive. When potash prices fluctuate, budget revenues become volatile. Refinery margins are also constantly changing. This is where the energy front comes into play. Ukraine's deep attacks are targeting oil logistics. The Unecha station in Bryansk has become a symbol of these attacks. Fires and heat traces have been reported on the ground. The Unecha station is a major hub in the Druzhba network. Belarusian refineries' crude oil flow passes through this hub. Mozyr and Naftan are dependent on this flow. Russia is trying to prioritize flows toward Europe. However, malfunctions can cause temporary disruptions. Even if there are no disruptions, the risk premium rises. Insurance, security, and logistics costs increase. Maintenance teams are deployed more frequently. Parts and labor costs rise. These expenses put pressure on the budget. If refinery products are made cheaper domestically, losses increase. If they are not made cheaper, social unrest increases. The government often turns to control prices. Price intervention disrupts stock balances. The market is punished with empty shelves. The black market and hoarding rear their heads. The most vulnerable segment feels the impact in the food sector. Food inflation accelerated on an annual basis in Belarus. The share of basic products in the basket is very high. In June, increases of over 30% were recorded for coffee and over 41% for chocolate. Double-digit price increases are also noticeable for meat, dairy products, and fruits and vegetables. Income growth has lagged behind inflation. Despite this, Belarusian central bank governor Roman Golovchenko argued that inflation is not speculative in nature, despite rapidly rising prices in the country. In July, the inflation rate rose to 7.4% year-on-year, exceeding official forecasts. Food prices approached 11%. According to Golovchenko, the reason for this increase is external factors, particularly the rise in imported raw materials and price differences with Russia. Household budgets have become sensitive to small shocks. Credit card use has increased without an increase in interest rates. The intensity of credit card use has put a strain on payment networks. Last month's card outage panic grew. The central bank said it was a technical glitch. The technical explanation may be correct. However, the damage to perceptions persists. When citizens cannot make payments at the cash register, mistrust increases. Memories of queues are not easily forgotten. Therefore, a communication strategy is critical. Transparent data and quick fixes are needed. The Belarusian government is limiting transparency. This approach may bring short-term silence. However, it fuels rumors in the medium term. Rumors are as powerful as reality in banking. Depositors do not wait for bad news. They withdraw their money as soon as they hear it. Deposit outflows are deadly for banks. If you cannot keep up with the outflow speed, the crisis grows. That is why the central bank must act early. Liquidity windows should be relaxed and announced. Collateral sets should be expanded in emergencies. The domestic payment infrastructure should be backed up. System providers' tests should be intensified. Cybersecurity drills should be increased. Stress tests should be conducted on all banks at the same time. The results should be summarized and disclosed, not kept secret. Hiding data, shocks amplifies them. Sharing data reduces panic. This simple rule applies to every economy. The sanctions package is also affecting non-financial sectors. New filters have been introduced for dual-use products. Renewing machinery has become more difficult. Automation investments have been put on hold. Production lines are facing risks related to spare parts. Supply through third countries has become more expensive. Delays in the logistics chain have lengthened. Buffer stocks are now mandatory in inventory policy. Buffer stocks tie up capital and increase costs. Cost increases are reflected in prices. When prices rise, demand falls. When demand falls, production slows down. Slower production puts pressure on employment. Even if layoffs do not begin, wages are stagnating. Real wages are eroding in the face of inflation. Households are surviving by depleting their savings. The depletion of savings thins the deposit base. A thinner deposit base restricts banks' liquidity. Banks tighten credit. Credit tightening slows down the real sector. This cycle acts as a brake on growth. The economy's momentum is already low. Reserves are important because the external deficit is closed. Belarus's reserves have been reported high in recent months. The share of gold is a decisive factor here. When the gold price rises, the reserve figure swells. Gold is a nominal item until it is converted into currency. Liquidity quality is not the same as reserve size. The FX component is a more critical measure. Transparent composition analysis is necessary here. Selling gold is politically difficult. The market knows this and discounts it. Therefore, record reserve news does not provide relief. It merely buys more time forward. Time, however, loses value if not used correctly. The rhetoric from the administration is hardening. Lukashenko is saying who should not be given money. This statement carries a message of budget discipline. It is also an admission of scarce resources. It acknowledges that the fiscal space is narrowing. Credits directed toward the state will be reviewed. Projects deemed wasteful will be suspended. The message is that inefficient subsidies will be cut. These moves may be technically correct. However, the social cost will be high. There is a small detail here. It is emphasized that the salaries of KGB employees will not be cut. Lukashenko emphasized that there will be no cuts in the salaries or allowances of employees working in the process of developing the activities of the Belarusian intelligence agency KGB, and that priority will even be given to their payments. This situation is testing the patience of ordinary citizens. Wages in public companies are being suppressed. Investment projects are slowing down. Regional employment areas are declining. Domestic demand is weakening further. Weakening demand reduces tax revenue. As tax revenue decreases, the deficit grows. As the deficit grows, borrowing costs rise. When borrowing costs rise, new projects are postponed. Trust is essential to break this vicious cycle. Trust does not come from words alone. It requires methodological data and consistency. The policy framework must be linked to the medium term. Monetary policy targets must be realistic. Clear communication is needed on the exchange rate regime. The tools to be used to defend the exchange rate must be clarified. Importers and banks must be able to plan. If an exchange rate shock is unexpected, the damage will be greater. The way to prevent an exchange rate shock is through forward guidance. If guidance is correct, panic will decrease. Let's return to the energy front. Russian crude oil is vital for Belarusian refineries. Alternative supply channels are limited. The sea route option is geographically challenging. This dependency turns into a political risk. Disruptions within Russia spill over into Belarus. Ukraine's attacks exacerbate this fragility. Targeting each node increases insurance costs. The bill for imported crude oil swells indirectly. Refinery margins may not be able to withstand this pressure. The state will be forced to subsidize margins. Subsidies mean budget deficits. Banks provide deficit financing. Banks buy government bonds, and balance sheets swell. Balance sheets become more dependent on state risk. If state risk rises, bank risk increases. As bank risk rises, funding costs climb. Foreign correspondents tighten limits. When limits are tightened, payment flows become difficult. Difficult payment flows slow down trade. Slowing trade hits production. As production declines, unemployment rises. As unemployment rises, social tension increases. When tensions rise, confidence declines further. This chain of events feeds the notion of a bankruptcy threshold. However, we must use the phrase, "banks are failing," with caution. This is because no official bankruptcy has been declared yet. There is no evidence of a systemic collapse. This text should be read as a risk analysis. The strong language in the headline emphasizes the risk of the process. Policymakers should not underestimate this risk. Early action reduces costs. Delay increases costs exponentially. A small buffer today can become a large shield tomorrow. The Belarusian government should proceed on 3 parallel tracks. Transparent stress tests should be published in the financial sector. Liquidity facilities should be kept ready for large banks. Deposit guarantee limits should be clearly explained. The domestic payment infrastructure should be diversified. Backup transition plans should be established for card schemes. On the energy front, the refinery maintenance schedule should be brought forward. Critical spare parts stock should be increased. Insurance policies should be updated and made more transparent. Alternative pumping scenarios should be developed to mitigate the Druzhba risk. Belarus-Russia coordination should be made real-time. Targeted support measures should be designed to soften price shocks on social services. A shift from general subsidies to targeted support should be made. Households with children and low-income groups should be prioritized. An early warning system should be established for the food supply chain. Logistical support should be provided before empty shelves appear. A data calendar should be announced in advance. Explanations should be provided for unexpected delays. The Crisis Management Center should hold regular briefings with the media. Online panic waves should be addressed immediately. Corrections to false news should be published quickly. Options on Belarus's external front appear limited. A financial lifeline from Russia could provide some breathing room. However, Russian banks are also under sanctions pressure. China remains cautious and limited. Gulf capital is wary of political risk. Therefore, there will be no solution without strengthening internal confidence. Building confidence internally is an invitation for foreign capital. Without an invitation, money will not come. If money does not come, the crisis will prolong. If the crisis prolongs, social costs will increase. The medium-term growth story for Belarus has weakened. The industrial composition needs technological transformation. The substitution strategy will fail if it is not supported by efficiency. Efficiency requires investment and technology transfer. The investment environment is not compatible with sanctions. Technology transfer faces legal risks. Institutional trust is essential to break this dilemma. The rule of law is necessary for institutional trust. Respect for arbitration decisions is key for the market. Circumventing sanctions is a short-term solution. In the long term, costly dependencies arise. The economy is managed by reflexes, not strategy. Reflexes do not always produce the right decision. The window of opportunity for Belarus is narrow but not completely closed. Technical dialogue with Europe may be possible in some areas. Humanitarian channels and food security are examples of this. Increased compliance in the financial sector reduces risks. Compliant actors reduce the risk of being placed on the grey list. The grey list exacerbates trust issues. Compliance is as much an image issue as it is a matter of maneuvering space. As the image improves, financing costs decline. When financing costs decline, credit channels open up. When the credit channel opens, production recovers. When production recovers, employment stabilizes. Stable employment reduces political risks. When political risks decrease, new investments are discussed. Belarus's story is in need of such a chain. However, today's realities are moving in the opposite direction of the chain. Sanctions have become more rigid and may continue to increase. Energy supply lines have become more visible targets. Financial substitution channels remain expensive and limited. Household patience is wearing thin in the face of inflation. Migration trends are strengthening among the younger generation. Brain drain is undermining medium-term growth. The share of the informal economy is rising. Informality is narrowing the tax base. The shrinking base is making the budget more fragile. Budget fragility is making banks more dependent on the state. State-dependent banking is creating a cycle of fragility. Time is limited to reverse this cycle. Steps must be bold, while there is still time. Transparency and data quality must be prioritized. Risks must be accepted and a management plan announced. A calendar that minimizes surprises must be drawn up. Central bank communication must be updated and intensified. Coordination with the real sector must be institutionalized. Trade unions and employers must be included in the process. Social buffers should be linked to the policy calendar. The search for external financing should be grounded in a realistic framework. Instead of short-term hot money, institutional partnerships should be sought. The partnership model should include technology and market access. Niche sectors that comply with sanctions should be selected. Green transformation initiatives offer long-term opportunities. Energy efficiency saves foreign exchange. Residential insulation and industrial furnace modernization are good examples. These projects will generate growth if they access credit. Credit requires credibility and transparency as prerequisites. The worst-case scenario for Belarus is clear. Deposit outflows from banks accelerate, triggering panic. The Druzhba pipeline experiences frequent interruptions. Refinery production is reduced, and the budget deficit surges. EU sanctions tighten further. Communication networks narrow further. The interbank market freezes and margins soar. The Belarusian ruble faces a dual exchange rate risk. A widespread emerges in the black market. Price controls expand and shelves empty. This scenario could trigger a chain of bankruptcies. However, this scenario is not inevitable. A second scenario is more moderate. Liquidity windows function effectively and panic is contained. Energy lines are maintained through rapid repairs. The rate of violations of EU sanctions decreases. Signals of compliance partially restore confidence. Food inflation is brought under control through targeted measures. Household real losses slow down. Growth remains low but positive. Budget deficits remain manageable. Individual problems may arise in the banking sector. Systemic collapse can be prevented. The third scenario aims to maintain balance. Mixed measures and selective guidance are implemented together. Reform steps are small but continuous. Fragile stability is maintained and confidence slowly increases. Continuity is the most critical word in this scenario. Belarusian politics is being tested on continuity. Crisis management is won, not in the moment, but over time. Economies that use time well soften severe blows. If hard blows are not softened, politics hardens. If politics hardens, the economy suffers even more. Breaking out of this vicious cycle requires vision and courage. Let's return to the headline. The phrase, Lukashenko on the brink of bankruptcy, is a warning sign. Financial and energy pressures are growing simultaneously. Household resilience is being tested. Sanctions are closing loopholes. The banking system is chained to public risk. If this chain is not broken, fragility will increase. If fragility increases, a spiral of bankruptcy could be triggered. Today, there is no official bankruptcy. Tomorrow, preventing this lies in the hands of the government. First, data, then a transparent plan, followed by consistent action. If action is taken, risks can be managed. If not, the warning in the headline could become reality. The clock is ticking for Belarus. Financing windows are narrowing. The energy supply line faces a new test every day. The patience of society is walking a fine line. The economy does not like uncertainty. As uncertainty increases, costs rise. As costs rise, room for maneuver shrinks. A shrinking room for maneuver lowers the quality of decisions. The first principle for breaking this cycle is clear. Predictability is the core of trust. Without trust, money does not flow. Without money flowing, there is no growth. Without growth, social peace cannot be sustained. The roadmap for Belarus must acknowledge this reality. Accepting this reality facilitates policy design. Shortcuts may seem appealing in the short term. However, in the long term, the costs are heavy. Circumventing sanctions is such a shortcut. A lasting solution lies in reducing systemic risks. Reducing systemic risk requires institutionalization. Institutionalization requires accountability. Without accountability, trust cannot be restored. Without trust, the statements in the headline will continue to be discussed. Today, it is necessary to conclude with the following statement. The Belarusian economy is oscillating between fragile stability and acute risk. The EU's 18th package has accelerated this oscillation. Attacks on the Druzhba pipeline have raised the risk premium. Household inflation is being felt in daily life. The banking system is becoming more dependent on public risk. There is no official bankruptcy, but the risk threshold is rising. The path to lowering this threshold is clear. Transparent data, consistent plans, and credible actions. Otherwise, the warning in the headline may one day become a summary. Reason must prevail before that day arrives. Thank you for watching.